"Don't touch that piano," the man in the tailored suit said with a half-smile, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be dismissive. "It's not for staff." And a few nearby guests chuckled, glasses clinking softly under the warm chandelier light as Ethan Cole paused mid-step, his hand hovering inches above the polished wood. His uniform simple, his presence almost invisible. Just another single dad working a late shift to make rent, to keep the lights on, to make sure his little girl had cereal. In the morning, nothing more, nothing worth noticing. And yet there was something in the way he stood there, not defensive, not embarrassed, just still, like a man who had learned long ago that dignity didn't need permission to exist. "I wasn't going to damage it," Ethan said quietly, his voice calm, steady, carrying just enough to reach the small circle of amused onlookers. "I just wanted to see if it still plays." And that earned a few more smirks, a raised eyebrow, a whispered comment about janitors with hobbies, the kind of soft cruelty that dressed itself as humor. While across the room, Victoria Hale stood near the grand staircase, her silhouette sharp against the golden glow, her attention elsewhere, reviewing something on her phone, unaware or perhaps uninterested in the small scene unfolding near the piano that had not been touched in years, a relic more than an instrument, something decorative, something symbolic, something no one dared to play because it belonged to her past. And her past was not something people spoke about, not in rooms like this, not among people who preferred polished surfaces over hidden truths. Ethan lowered his hand slowly, not in surrender, but in thought, his eyes resting on the keys, ivory worn slightly with time, as if they remembered fingers that had once cared enough to press them with meaning. And for a brief second, the noise of the room faded for him, replaced by something quieter, something older, the echo of a small voice, asking, "Dad, why don't you play anymore?" And he swallowed that memory gently, like something fragile, something that could break if handled too roughly. "Go ahead." Another voice chimed in, mocking but curious, "Give us a show." And there it was, the invitation wrapped in condescension, the stage built on doubt, the expectation of failure already written into the air. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried years of silence, of choosing peace over pride, of walking away instead of proving something to people who weren't really watching. And yet tonight, something shifted, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet decision forming beneath the surface, like a note waiting to be played. He pulled the bench out with a soft scrape against the marble floor, the sound barely noticeable beneath the low hum of conversation, but close enough for a few heads to turn, for a few conversations to pause mid-sentence. "This should be interesting," someone whispered, amused, expecting a joke, expecting awkwardness, expecting nothing. Ethan sat down, his posture relaxed but grounded, hands resting gently on his knees for a brief moment, as if asking permission from something unseen, not from the room, not from the people, but from the memory itself. And then, without looking up, without announcing anything, he placed his fingers on the keys, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain, like someone who hadn't forgotten, only chosen silence. And in that exact second, before a single note was played, something in the room shifted, subtle but real, like the air itself was holding its breath. The first note did not announce itself. It arrived quietly, almost hesitant, like a memory stepping into a room it was not sure it was welcome in. And for a moment, no one reacted. A few guests continued sipping their drinks. Someone checked their phone. Another stifled a laugh, waiting for the mistake, for the awkward stumble that would confirm what they already believed. But Ethan did not stumble. His fingers moved with a calm precision, not fast, not showy, just steady, like a man who understood that real strength never rushed to prove itself. One note became two. Two became a phrase. And the phrase unfolded into a melody that did not belong to this room. It did not belong to polished floors or tailored suits or quiet judgments disguised as elegance. It belonged somewhere softer, somewhere older, somewhere that remembered warmth. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the noise in the room began to thin. A conversation paused mid-sentence. A glass stopped halfway to someone's lips, a quiet shift spreading like a ripple across still water. "Wait," someone whispered, not loudly, just enough to interrupt the rhythm of indifference. And then another voice, softer this time. That is actually good." But it was more than good. It was familiar in a way no one could explain, a kind of recognition that lived deeper than logic. Ethan's eyes remained on the keys, not seeking approval, not reacting to the change in the room, because he was not playing for them. He was playing through them, past them, towards something only he could see. And with each note, the melody grew fuller, richer, carrying a quiet dignity that filled the space without asking permission. Across the room, Victoria Hale's thumb stopped scrolling, just for a second at first, a small pause that meant nothing to anyone watching. But then it happened again, longer this time, her eyes lifting slowly from the screen as if something invisible had reached out and touched a place she had carefully kept locked away. The sound reached her not as music, but as memory, raw and uninvited, and she did not move at first. She simply listened, her posture still composed, her expression controlled. But there was a flicker, something almost imperceptible passing through her eyes, the kind of shift that happens when the past does not knock. It simply walks in, and back near the piano. The man who had laughed earlier no longer smiled, his expression uncertain now, as if the ground beneath his assumptions had quietly shifted. Is that a real piece? Someone asked, but no one answered, because no one knew, and Ethan did not explain. He did not look up. He did not acknowledge the growing attention. His world had narrowed to the keys beneath his fingers and the story they carried. A story not told with words, but with pauses, with timing, with the kind of restraint that only comes from loss and healing and the long road in between. And then, just as the melody reached a point where it could have grown louder, could have demanded applause, he softened it instead, pulling the sound inward, letting it breathe, letting it settle into something quieter, something more honest. And that was the moment the room truly changed, because silence did not fall all at once. It arrived piece by piece, until even the hum of the lights seemed too loud, until even the smallest movement felt like it might break something fragile. And somewhere near the staircase, Victoria Hale took a single step forward without realizing she had moved at all. She did not rush. She did not call attention to herself. She simply walked, one measured step at a time, her heels barely making a sound against the marble as the distance between her and the piano slowly disappeared. And people noticed. Of course they did, because when Victoria Hale moved, rooms usually followed, conversations shifted, attention realigned. But tonight it was different. Tonight she was not leading the room. She was being pulled by something she did not control, something she had not felt in years. And as she drew closer, the melody became clearer, not louder, but sharper, each note carrying a weight that pressed gently against her chest, a familiarity she could not ignore. No, she whispered under her breath, so softly that even she barely heard it, her eyes fixed on Ethan's hands, on the way his fingers moved with a calm certainty, not guessing, not searching, but remembering. And that was what unsettled her, not the skill, not the sound, but the memory inside it. Because this was not just any song. This was a song that had not been played in this building, in this city, in her life, for over a decade. And yet here it was, alive again, breathing through a man she had never seen before, a man who wore a simple uniform and carried himself like he had nothing to prove. Where did he learn that? Someone murmured behind her. But Victoria did not turn. She could not turn. Her world had narrowed to the space between each note, to the pauses that said more than the sound itself, and suddenly, the room around her faded, replaced by something warmer, softer, a memory she had buried under years of success and control, a small living room with sunlight spilling through half-closed blinds, the faint smell of coffee in the air, and a younger version of herself sitting beside a piano that looked almost identical to this one, her fingers clumsy, uncertain, while a voice beside her guided gently, patiently. Not like that. The voice had said, warm but firm. Feel the space between the notes. That is where the story lives. And she had laughed back then, light and unguarded. That sounds like something you made up. And the voice had answered, maybe, but it is still true. And just like that, the memory snapped into the present, sharp and undeniable. Victoria stopped walking, her breath catching slightly, her composure cracking not outwardly, not visibly to most, but inside, where control had always been absolute. And at the piano, Ethan reached the part of the melody that almost no one would recognize. The part that was never written down, never published, a variation that only existed in private, in quiet rooms, in moments shared between people who trusted each other enough to create something imperfect and real. And that was when it happened. Victoria's hand lifted slightly, not to stop him, not to interrupt, but as if reaching towards something she had lost, her voice barely more than a breath. That part. And she did not finish the sentence, because she could not, because the truth was already there, already unfolding in front of her, and for the first time in years, Victoria Hale was not the most powerful person in the room. She was simply someone remembering. No one moved to stop him. No one spoke, and yet everything in the room had shifted into a fragile kind of attention, the kind that does not ask questions because it already feels the answer coming. And Ethan did not look up. Not when he sensed her presence just a few feet away, not when the silence behind him deepened into something almost reverent, because he knew that if he broke the moment too early, it would disappear. And some things only exist when you let them unfold on their own. His fingers pressing into the next sequence with a softness that carried weight, the melody bending slightly, not perfectly polished, not performed for applause, but lived in, like a memory that had been carried for too long to be anything but honest. And Victoria stood there, closer now than anyone else, her breath shallow, her eyes no longer sharp with control but distant, searching, as if trying to reconcile the man in front of her with something she had lost years ago. That transition, she said quietly, her voice steady but thinner than before, that was never written down, and a few heads turned at that, confusion flickering across faces that did not understand the significance. But Ethan understood, he always had, and for the first time since he sat down, his hand slowed, not stopping, just easing, as if acknowledging the presence of someone who finally heard what the music was saying. No, he answered, still looking at the keys, his voice calm, almost gentle. It was not meant to be. And that was enough, more than enough, because the room did not need the full story. Not yet. The truth was already pressing against the edges of the moment, waiting. Victoria took another step closer, now standing beside the piano, her reflection faintly visible in the polished surface, her posture no longer commanding, no longer distant. Just human, just present. Who taught you that? She asked, and this time her voice did not carry authority. It carried something else, something softer, something almost careful, as if the answer mattered more than she was ready to admit. Ethan's fingers came to rest on the final note, not ending abruptly, but letting it fade naturally into the silence that followed. And when the sound finally disappeared, the quiet that remained was heavier than anything that had come before, because now, there was no music to hold it together, only truth waiting to be spoken. Ethan lifted his hands slowly from the keys, resting them in his lap for a brief moment before turning his head just enough to meet her gaze. Not fully, not confrontational, just enough to acknowledge her presence. Someone who believed music should not be owned, he said, his tone steady, respectful, only remembered. And that sentence landed differently, not like a performance, not like something rehearsed, but like a piece of something real being placed gently into the space between them. Victoria's expression shifted, not dramatically, but undeniably, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition, the kind that comes when a puzzle piece finally finds its place. That is exactly what he used to say, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, and a faint murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion growing, curiosity sharpening. But no one dared interrupt, because even those who did not understand could feel that they were standing inside something rare, something that did not happen twice. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because some truths need space before they can be fully seen. And in that silence, the distance between a powerful CEO and a quiet single father no longer felt like distance at all. It felt like something closing. The silence did not break. It deepened, settling over the room like something sacred, something no one wanted to disturb. And Victoria did not step back. She did not reclaim the distance that usually protected her. Instead, she stood there beside him, close enough now to see the slight wear on the piano keys, close enough to notice the calluses on his fingers, the kind that did not come from playing in grand halls, but from working long hours, from fixing things, from building a life piece by Peace, say his name, she said quietly, her voice no longer commanding but searching, almost fragile, and a few people shifted uncomfortably, sensing that whatever was happening had moved far beyond entertainment, far beyond curiosity. This was something personal, something real. Ethan's gaze lowered slightly, not in avoidance, but in respect, as if the name itself carried weight, as if it deserved to be handled carefully. Daniel Hale, he said at last, and the moment the name left his lips, the air in the room changed again, sharper this time, more defined, like a truth stepping fully into the light. Victoria's breath caught, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough for the closest few to notice, her composure holding, but barely. That is not possible, someone whispered behind them, but no one answered, because the answer was already there, written in the way she stood, in the way her eyes did not leave Ethan's face. He never taught anyone outside the family, she said, her voice steadier now, but edged with something deeper, something protective. He was very particular about that. Ethan nodded once, a small, almost invisible gesture. He agreed, and there was no challenge in his tone, no attempt to prove anything, just acknowledgement, just truth, and that made it harder to dismiss, harder to reduce to coincidence. Then how do you know the variation? She pressed. One step closer now, not aggressive, but insistent, because this mattered, because this was not just about a song. This was about something she had lost, something she had never fully understood, and Ethan finally looked at her fully, not intimidated, not defensive, just present. Because he stopped playing for the world, he said quietly. But he never stopped playing at home. And that sentence landed heavier than anything before it, because it was not information, it was memory. And Victoria's expression shifted again, more visibly now, the control slipping just enough to reveal something beneath it, something softer, something that had been hidden for years behind boardrooms and decisions and expectations. That was before she began, but the sentence did not finish, because the timeline she had built in her mind, the version of the past she had accepted, was starting to crack, and Ethan did not rush to fill the silence. He let it sit, he let it breathe, because some truths cannot be forced. They have to be realized. You were not there at the end, he added gently, not accusing, not harsh, just stating something that felt true, and a ripple of quiet tension moved through the room, not because of conflict, but because of what the words implied. Victoria's eyes flickered, just for a second, a flash of something like regret, like a question she had never allowed herself to ask. No, she admitted softly, and for the first time that night, the most powerful person in the room sounded uncertain, not weak, just human, just real, and Ethan nodded again, not in judgment, but in understanding. He still played that song, he said, his voice steady, grounded, even when no one was listening. And that was the moment something shifted completely, not in the room, not in the crowd, but between them, because now this was no longer about a stranger playing a forgotten melody. This was about a bridge forming between two versions of the same story, one remembered, one lived, and neither of them could pretend it did not matter. No one interrupted. No one dared to reduce the moment to something simple, because it had already become too real, too layered with something deeper than curiosity. And Victoria stood there, her mind no longer in the room, no longer anchored to the present, but drifting backward through years she had carefully organized into neat, controlled memories. He stopped playing, she said quietly, almost as if reminding herself. After my mother passed, he said music did not make sense anymore, and the statement hung there, familiar, rehearsed, something she had told herself enough times that it had become truth. But Ethan did not nod. He did not confirm it. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his expression calm, steady, as if he understood the weight of what she had just said and the silence behind it. He stopped playing in public, Ethan replied gently, and that one word, public, shifted everything, because it introduced a possibility she had never considered, a version of events that existed outside her understanding, outside her absence. Victoria's brows drew together slightly, not in anger, but in confusion. What do you mean? She asked, her voice quieter now, less certain. And Ethan took a slow breath, not preparing to argue, not preparing to prove anything, just preparing to share something that had lived with him for years, something he had never expected to say out loud in a room like this. I used to fix things for him, Ethan said, his gaze drifting for a moment, not away from her, but inward, toward the memory itself. Small repairs, broken hinges, a loose window frame. Nothing important. And a few people exchanged glances, trying to connect the story, trying to understand how a man like him could possibly fit into the life of someone like Daniel Hale. But Ethan did not rush. He did not fill the gaps for them. He spoke at his own pace, steady, measured. He would ask me to stay sometimes, he continued, just to listen. And that sentence landed softly, but its impact was immediate, because it carried something undeniable, something human. Victoria's eyes searched his face now, not with skepticism, but with something closer to need. Listen to what? She asked. And for the first time, her voice carried a trace of urgency, not loud, not demanding, but real. And Ethan met her gaze fully, his expression unchanged, grounded in a quiet kind of honesty. To that song, he said simply, and the room seemed to contract around them, the edges of the world pulling closer as the truth settled into place. Victoria's lips parted slightly, her breath catching again, but this time it lingered, because the implication was no longer abstract. It was specific, it was personal, it was undeniable. No, she said softly, but there was no conviction in it. Only hesitation, only the beginning of something unraveling. He would not have, she started, but the sentence faded before it could complete, because somewhere beneath the certainty she had carried for years, something else was surfacing, something quieter, something she had ignored. And Ethan did not challenge her. He did not push. He simply let the silence exist, because silence, he knew, had a way of revealing what words could not. He said it helped him remember her. Ethan added after a moment, his voice softer now, almost careful, as if the memory itself deserved respect. And that was when it happened, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Victoria's composure cracked just enough for the truth to show through, not as weakness, but as recognition, her eyes lowering briefly, her shoulders softening in a way no one in that room had ever seen before. And for a second, she was not a CEO, not a figure of power, not someone above the room. She was simply a daughter realizing that there had been a part of her father's life she had never known. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of memory, full of truth, and full of something quietly waiting to be understood. The room did not return to normal. It could not, because something essential had shifted beneath the surface, something that no polite conversation or forced laughter could cover again. And Victoria remained still beside the piano, her eyes no longer scanning the room, no longer calculating, but fixed somewhere deeper, somewhere within herself. He never told me, she said finally, her voice steady but quieter than anyone had ever heard it, not fragile, but honest, and that honesty carried more weight than any authority she had ever used. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to look away or lean in closer, because what they were witnessing was no longer a performance. It was something private unfolding in public, and Ethan did not respond immediately. He allowed her words to settle, to exist without interruption, because he understood that some realizations needed space, not answers. He tried. Ethan said after a moment, his tone calm, respectful, just not in the way you expected. And that sentence landed gently, but it carried a quiet truth that was difficult to ignore. Victoria's eyes lifted toward him again, searching, not for contradiction, but for clarity. What does that mean? She asked. And this time there was no edge, no control, just a question, simple and real. And Ethan nodded slightly, as if he had anticipated it. He would play that song every Sunday evening. Ethan explained, his voice steady, grounded in memory. Same time, same place. Even if no one was there to hear it. And the image formed in the room without effort. A man alone with a piano, not performing, not impressing, just remembering, just holding on to something that mattered. He said if he stopped playing it, he would lose her completely. Ethan added, and that was when the air shifted again, softer this time, heavier in a different way, because this was no longer about music, it was about love, about grief, about the quiet ways people carry what they cannot replace. Victoria's expression changed. Again, more visibly now, her composure not breaking, but reshaping, revealing something underneath that had always been there but rarely seen. "I thought he moved on," she said, almost to herself, the words slow, careful, as if she was hearing them for the first time, and Ethan shook his head gently, not dismissing her, not correcting her, just offering something truer. "He did not move on," he said. "He learned how to carry it." And that distinction settled into the space between them, quiet, but undeniable. And for a moment, Victoria closed her eyes, just briefly, just enough to let the truth reach her without resistance. And when she opened them again, something had changed, not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but enough that the distance she had built around herself no longer felt as solid as it once had. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost careful. And Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, not as a CEO, not as someone above him, but simply as a person standing in front of him. "Because you deserve to know what he never stopped holding on to," he said, and there was no judgment in it, no accusation, just a quiet offering of truth, and the room remained silent, not because they were told to be, but because no one wanted to break what had formed, a moment where status no longer mattered, where perception no longer mattered, where the only thing left was something real, something quiet, something that could not be undone once it was seen. The silence did not feel heavy anymore. It felt clear, like something long buried had finally found its way to the surface, and no one in the room moved to interrupt it, not even the ones who had laughed earlier, because whatever had been exposed here was beyond judgment, beyond status, beyond anything they could casually dismiss. And Victoria stood there, closer to the piano than she had ever allowed herself to be in years, her hand resting lightly on its edge, not claiming it, not owning it, just touching it as if it might respond, as if it might remember her too. "He played every Sunday," she repeated softly, the words slower now, more deliberate, as if she was trying to reconstruct something she had missed, something she had never seen. And Ethan nodded once, not adding anything, not taking anything away, because the truth was already doing its work. "I was always busy," she continued, her voice steady but quieter, stripped of the certainty that once defined it. "Meetings, travel, expectations," and each word sounded smaller than the one before it, not because they were unimportant, but because they no longer explained what they used to justify. "I thought he understood," she said, and this time it was not a statement. It was a question that had arrived. Too late, and Ethan looked at her, not with sympathy, not with judgment, but with something simpler, something steadier. "He did understand," he said, and the answer came without hesitation, without weight, just truth. "That is why he never asked you to stay." And that sentence settled into the space between them with a quiet finality, not harsh, not accusing, just real. And Victoria's fingers tightened slightly against the piano's surface, her gaze dropping to the keys, to the place where the music had just lived again for the first time in years. And for a moment, she did not speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because she finally understood what had not been said before. And around them, the room remained still, not frozen, but respectful, as if everyone present had instinctively stepped back from something they knew was not theirs to interrupt. "Why did you stop playing?" she asked after a moment, her voice softer now, more careful. And this question was different, not about her past, not about her father, but about him, about the man who had brought all of this back without asking for anything in return. Ethan's gaze shifted briefly to the keys, then back to her, his expression unchanged, but something quieter moved beneath it, something that had been there all along. "Because some songs are not meant to be played for a room like this," he said, and there was no bitterness in it, no resentment, just a simple boundary shaped by experience. "They are meant for someone who needs to hear them." And that answer lingered, not as a rejection, but as a reflection, and Victoria absorbed it slowly, her posture easing in a way no one had seen before, the distance she once held dissolving not through effort, but through understanding. "Then play it again," she said, and this time her voice was not commanding, not requesting, but asking, genuinely, openly. And the shift was unmistakable, because for the first time, she was not asking as someone above him. She was asking as someone beside him, and Ethan studied her for a brief moment, not measuring her status, not weighing the room, just looking at her as she was now, present, unguarded, and then he nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging something unspoken between them, something that had finally aligned. And as he turned back toward the piano, placing his hands gently above the keys once more, the room did not wait for what would happen next. It already knew, because this time, the music would not be heard the same way again. This time, when his fingers touched the keys, there was no hesitation at all, no testing, no searching, just certainty. The kind that comes when something is no longer hidden, no longer guarded, but finally understood, and the first note carried differently, not quieter, not louder, but deeper, as if it no longer needed to introduce itself. It simply existed, and the room responded without effort. Conversations had already died, movement had already stilled, but now even the smallest distractions faded completely, because this was no longer background. This was not entertainment. This was something being returned, something unfinished being completed, and Ethan played without looking up, without acknowledging the room, because he was not playing to be seen. He was playing to be heard by the one person who now stood beside him, no longer distant, no longer untouchable, but present in a way she had not been in years. And Victoria did not move, her hand still resting lightly on the piano, her eyes fixed on the keys as if they might reveal something more than sound. And as the melody unfolded again, something subtle but undeniable changed in her expression. Not a dramatic reaction, not tears or collapse, but a quiet shift, a softening, a recognition that went beyond memory and into understanding. Because now she was not just hearing what her father had played, she was hearing why he had played it, and that difference settled into her like something long overdue, each note carrying not just the past, but the space she had left within it. And yet there was no blame in it, no accusation, only a quiet truth that asked to be accepted, and for the first time, she did not resist it. She allowed it. She let the music reach the places she had kept closed, and in doing so, something inside her changed, not broken, not undone, but rebalanced, as if something she had been carrying without realizing it had finally been set down, and the melody reached its final sequence, the same variation, the same unspoken part that had once belonged only to private moments. But now it did not feel private anymore. It felt shared, not owned, not controlled, just remembered. And when the final note faded, Ethan did not move his hands right away. He let the silence settle naturally, let it fill the space completely, and no one rushed to clap. No one spoke, because applause would have felt too small, too shallow for what had just happened. And after a long moment, he lifted his hands slowly, resting them once more in his lap, and only then did Victoria move, just slightly, her hand leaving the piano, not abruptly, not reluctantly, but with intention, as if she understood that something had been given back to her and did not need to be held so tightly anymore. "Thank you," she said, and the words were simple, but they carried none of the distance she once used, no authority, no performance, just gratitude, real and unfiltered. And Ethan nodded once, not as a gesture of acknowledgement, but as something quieter, something mutual, because he had not come there to change anything. He had only brought something with him that had always been waiting to return. And around them, the room remained still for one final moment before the world slowly began to move again. But it did not move the same way, not with the same assumptions, not with the same careless certainty, because now they had all seen something they could not unsee. That dignity does not need permission, that truth does not need volume, and that sometimes the strongest moment in a room is not when someone speaks, but when everyone else finally becomes silent.